See, this goes on. Goes green, you're on. Test, 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 test. 1, 2, test, test, test. Test, test.
Hello. Welcome to the first session in the Partners Breakout Room at Soybean Summit. My name is Deanna Burkhart, Producer and Field Services Administrator for the Illinois Soybean Association. I will be the room moderator for today's event. I'm pleased to welcome our first breakout session presenter, Chris Reynolds of American Farmland Trust. Chris, who is a CCA, joined American Farmland Trust in 2017, managing Midwest programs focused on sustainable farming practices, farmland protection, and water quality improvement. With 15 years of experience as a resource conservationist and cover crop specialist, he collaborates with farmers and landowners. Chris, a fifth-generation farmer, actively incorporates soil health practices such as cover crops and no-till on his corn and soybean farm in Nokomis, Illinois. Holding a bachelor's in agronomy and ag business from Illinois State University, he is also a 4R nutrient management and sustainability specialist. Today, Chris will share diverse conservation funding opportunities for farmers. Before we get started, as a reminder, please be sure to use the microphone during the question and answer period at the end so that others in the room and also those online can hear your questions. Thank you, and please join me in welcoming Chris.
Thanks, Deanna. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us right after lunch. As Deanna mentioned, I'm Chris Reynolds. I'm the Midwest Regional Director for American Farmland Trust, and based out of my home office about an hour and a half from here down in Montgomery County in Nokomis. In my role, I have a lot of, AFT has a very broad mission, as she mentioned, and really in my background, a lot of that is focused on working with farmers to help them adopt soil health practices to help make their farms more resilient and more productive. As she mentioned, I'm also a corn and soybean farmer and cover crop grower in Montgomery County. And a lot of the photos that you'll see in here, one of the benefits of also being as a farmer is you have a nice slide deck to choose from when you're putting together a presentation. So a lot of the photos are taken from my farm and showcase some of the practices that I'm currently using. So really excited to talk about conservation funding opportunities with you all today. Understanding is a big word here and a big task, I think, for me. We've got a lot of programs we're going to talk about. Hopefully at the end of this, you'll have a little better understanding of what is available out there, what to look for, some of the questions to ask when choosing a program that's right for you. So agriculture and conservation have always been a huge part of my life. That's why I was drawn to work for American Farmland Trust over 7 years ago. AFT is a national nonprofit organization that works to save the land by protecting farmland, promoting sound farming practices, and also helping to keep farmers on the land. The photo on the left there is a photo of my grandfather in the early 1970s. That is an old Case 930 tractor, still in use on the farm today. Much different use on the farm today, but nevertheless, my passion for agriculture started like probably yours did as a young child, growing up on the farm and being working with family. The photo in the center there, this is of my youngest son, Connor. This is a photo that was taken in 2013. He's now 15 years old, so he looks a lot different than what he does today, and has grown significantly. So I still use this photo because this was taken the first year that I had planted soybeans into cover crops, into cereal rye, and just really had a great year with that system, and have continued to use that ahead of soybeans ever since. I also always like to provide an opportunity to plug the STAR program, Saving Tomorrow's Agriculture Resources. Just a great program to help you kind of assess the individual practices on your individual fields. And so the STAR program, of course, originated here in Champaign County. So some of the topics I'm going to cover today, I'm only going to mention a handful of some of the funding opportunities, but I hope to provide you with some additional resources that will help you to identify the practices and programs that are the right fit for your goals, for your land, and for your operation. As Deanna mentioned, I've worked in conservation agriculture for over 20 years now, and there have really never been more public and private conservation funding opportunities than what exists today and what will exist over the next several years. So hope to talk a little bit more about that. But here's a few of the topics we're going to cover today during our time. The first one I want to talk about, this program is near and dear to my heart, having spent almost 16 years working for a conservation district in my local county. The Partners for Conservation program, it's through the Illinois Department of Agriculture, and it's administered by your local soil and water conservation district. It provides a lot of different cost-share incentives for soil health practices and also for structural practices. One of the changes that's been made since my time with the district is they now fund cover crops at $40 per acre. So one of the highest per acre payment rates for cover crops, and these are for new cover crops only. So again, a good program, allows you to do multiple practices, provides you with an opportunity to try that practice out for just 1 year if you'd like to, which it differs from some of the other programs. But there's also funding for structural practices like water and sediment control basins, terraces, and other infield management practices like no-till and nutrient management. Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities. So this started last year. The USDA committed to supporting a diverse range of farmers through this Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities program. This effort's aimed to expand markets for America's climate smart commodities, leverage the greenhouse gas benefits of climate smart commodity production, and provide direct, meaningful benefits to production agriculture. The USDA is investing more than $3.1 billion in over 141 projects across the U.S. There are 25 of those 141 projects that are in Illinois, and 11 of which support soybean production. Soil and Water Outcomes is a program that Illinois Soybean works with, started in Iowa, I think covers multiple states, but it covers practice payments that couple both climate and water quality together. ADM Regenerations is a program that AFT works closely on. This year, we were successful in enrolling 225,000 acres of cover crops into their regenerations program that provides farmers with a 1-year contract for applying those practices on their land. What's unique about regenerations from some of the other programs we'll talk about today is that farmers that have been doing cover crops on their land in the past are eligible for this program. True Terra is another program that AFT is working with that will be getting rolled out here in Illinois in the near term. So I want to talk a little bit about the Inflation Reduction Act. You've probably heard about it. You've probably heard about Inflation Reduction Act as part of the Farm Bill conversation as well. But it provides the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service with an additional $20 billion in funds over the next 5 years for its existing conservation programs like the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP, the Conservation Stewardship Program, CSP, and also the Ag Conservation Easement Program, or ACEP. The Inflation Reduction Act directs NRCS to use these additional funds specifically for climate change mitigation, so activities that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improve carbon storage. So again, practices like cover crops, reduced till or no-till, nutrient management, prescribed grazing, and others. To put this in perspective, this amount of money, $20 billion is the amount of funding that NRCS typically would get for conservation programs over a 10-year period of time. So in the next 5 years, we are spending, there's $20 billion in addition to the $1.8 billion that's spent nationwide on an annual basis. So it's a significant investment in these practices, in these programs. And again, as I started out, it's once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for farmers to access incentives to incentivize new conservation practices on the land. So one of the ways that Illinois NRCS is planning to utilize this funding is through the Act Now program. And Act Now is a process that allows NRCS to quickly approve and obligate ranked applications in a designated ranking pool. When an eligible application meets or exceeds the ranking criteria, they're automatically approved. Having worked in an NRCS office, having worked around these programs, one of the challenges and complaints that we've heard from farmers is the waiting period. We go into that office, we want to sign up for cover crops, and we have to wait. We may have to wait 3 months, we may have to wait 6 months. The Act Now program is really meant to streamline that process. They know that certain practices like cover crops, nutrient management, no-till, and reduced-till are priority practices for this funding, and that if they meet that ranking criteria, they can automatically be approved. So I caught up with the state conservationist, Tammy Willis, who was here earlier. I caught up with her at lunch, and I said, hey, what I'm seeing is that all of these funds are obligated. And she confirmed that during the first batching period in January, all of the funds they had designated from the Inflation Reduction Act for EQIP have been obligated. But this is a process that we may start to see more of, and they may start to use this for some other NRCS programs as well. This helps streamline the program, helps make it easier for farmers to enroll and have and receive some better feedback from that process. This program is near and dear to my heart. This is something I started on when I first came to AFT in 2017. It's the Fall Covers for Spring Savings Program. It provides a $5 per acre premium discount on crop insurance for planting cover crops. These do not have to be new acres, but they cannot be enrolled in other programs, other private programs like Partners for Conservation or EQIP, for example. In 2023, 160,000 acres received the premium. There was about 40,000 acres that came over from the EPA, from the Gulf Hypoxia Task Force, in addition to the 100,000 acres from the Department of Ag. In 2024, the sign-up just ended January 15th. There was 140,000 acres available, and we had over 240,000 acres applied into the program. So we're seeing an increase in demand. Pre-enrollment process started this year, which allowed farmers to go in and submit their information ahead of time. On December 15th, they could go on to the Department of Ag's website and hit submit. So this program, we're getting a lot of feedback from farmers that it's simple, it's easy, and it's worth the $5. Especially for farmers that are already doing cover crops, this makes a lot of sense. One of the goals that we had when we started this program was really to showcase how cover crops could be thought of as a risk reduction tool. And what better way to couple it than to couple it with the crop insurance program that is the farmer's #1 trusted safety net. And think back, for those of you that were using cover crops in 2017, there were some issues with whether or not to report those cover crops, how they might affect your crop insurance. So over the course of the past 7 years, we've been able to address a lot of those concerns, make some changes to some of the crop insurance policy and guidelines to make it more conducive for cover crops within those systems. With this program, it does require you to report your acres to the Farm Service Agency office. This is the same way you report your corn and soybean or wheat acres today. You go in, you tell them what day you planted it. I think there's different categories for cover crops, and you certify those acres. And this certification process is going to be required for some programs. It's a way for you to say that FSA has certified that I planted these acres. We know the specific boundaries for these fields. And so it's just a great way in thinking about all of these programs. I encourage everyone who is planting cover crops to certify those acres, because as I'll talk later, it may be an integral part of that process in providing some data and verification in some of the private markets. And so we see a huge demand for this program. We are currently advocating with Illinois Soy and with others to increase the available acres to 500,000 for next year for this program. It is a Department of Ag program that receives funding through a line item in the budget. So again, we're trying to get it to where it will have a real impact here in the state and will encourage farmers to adopt more cover crop acres. This slide just shows just kind of the demand. The dark bars there are the demand year by year since 2019 up to 2023. We don't have it updated with the 23-24 numbers yet, but again, we continue to increase the demand for this program, and we're trying to continue to increase the supply for this program as well. So now I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about some of the private markets or carbon markets. AFT recently, several colleagues of mine put out a guidebook to navigating the carbon markets. I did bring a few copies. If you like paper copies, it's about a 40-page report. You can also scan that QR code there and access that guidebook online. But we know that the landscape of ag carbon markets and programs is changing rapidly. We've been hearing about them for the last several years. It really makes it hard to keep it all straight. So our policy and science experts at AFT created this guidebook to not only help farmers, but also to help ag advisors and conservation professionals, navigate the ag carbon markets. Corporations are increasingly using the purchase of carbon markets and carbon credits to meet their sustainability goals, some of which can be generated by farmers through the adoption of climate-smart practices. However, among the many agriculture carbon markets, there are significant variations in costs and risks and also in benefits. So to help farmers and advisors navigate these programs, we created a list of 10 questions that I'll go through today that farmers might want to ask when considering participation. And those will be split into two sections. The first section is really just kind of the background on how ag carbon markets work. And the second section will really focus on what questions should be at top of your mind when you're exploring opportunities with carbon markets. So the first question is, what is an ag carbon market and why are farmers being asked to join? So an ag carbon market is an environmental market developed to meet the growing demand from corporations with supply of carbon credits from the agricultural sector. Farmers are paid for the reductions in greenhouse gas emissions and soil carbon sequestration on their land. And corporations use that credit to offset their hard-to-avoid emissions. Just how many ag carbon markets are there and how do they differ? So ag carbon markets aren't new. They've been around for about 30 years. I remember in one of my first years working as a resource conservationist in the early 2000s, there was the Chicago Climate Exchange. Some of you may remember that. Some of you may have participated in that. It was really focused on no-till at that time. But they've been around for a long time. And although they're rapidly changing and being created and discontinued frequently, we've done our best to try to chronicle the 27 markets that we see today through the report. So some of these are compliance offset markets where carbon emission reductions are regulated, but mostly we're talking about voluntary carbon offset markets where corporations pay others to help them reduce their Scope 1 emissions from their facilities and vehicles. Alternatively, Scope 3 programs or inset markets are those where a corporation is working to reduce emissions within its supply chain by paying for improved practices during the production of its agricultural inputs. So one of the things you'll hear a lot about is additionality. So what the heck is it? Why is it so important? And how does it affect me? So additionality is a criterion for carbon markets to ensure that a corporate buyer's payment results in new greenhouse gas reductions or carbon sequestration beyond what would have occurred without their payment. Simply put, as a way of determining that the buyer's carbon payment created a climate mitigation benefit. For farmers, this means implementing a new climate-smart practice for your fields to achieve more than business as usual reductions in greenhouse gas emissions and or soil carbon sequestration to make up for the buyers, for the corporate buyers' emissions. So in other words, if there are practices that you may be doing on your farm, already have been doing, that might not make you eligible for some of the carbon markets when they talk about additionality. As I mentioned before, some of those programs do allow previous conservation practice adoption to take place. You may receive a little bit lower payment on those acres. So how is the government involved in ag carbon markets? So currently the federal government has no direct role in carbon markets. They are helping to improve the quality of ag carbon credits through the measurement, monitoring, reporting, and verification process. In 2022, USDA invested over $3.1 billion, as I mentioned earlier, into the Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities. So it's one way that they are providing support to the corporations for establishing new carbon markets. So now we'll kind of get into questions that should be top of mind for you as you're thinking about participating in carbon markets. The first one is, am I eligible to participate? So each carbon market or program uses different criteria. Most allow for rented land, but as we know in Illinois, where over 60% of the land is rented, that can be a barrier to conservation practice adoption. It also can be a barrier to program participation. Some also have minimum acreage requirements, and some only operate in certain states or for certain commodities and for certain climate smart practices. The guidebook also offers examples of ag carbon markets for each eligibility criteria and points to the market comparison table developed by others like the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership. So what are the current ag carbon markets paying for? Are they paying for practices or are they paying for outcomes? So the ag carbon markets may pay for one or multiple environmental outcomes, including carbon sequestration, the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, including carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and or the reduction of a pollutant such as nitrate. Currently, most markets are focused on carbon and greenhouse gases, but as I mentioned earlier, soil, water, and outcomes funder, soil and water SWAF, as you mentioned earlier, soil, water, and outcomes fund, they're paying for greenhouse gas reductions and water quality outcomes as well. When a payment is based on the per acre implementation of a specific practice, the payment is based on a computer modeled environmental outcomes that are expected to be achieved by adopting that practice on those particular acres. This is one of my favorites. They want to look at my what. What information and access do I have to provide? So it's all about the data, as I mentioned earlier, making sure that you have the data that you need and available, that you have verification, that you have the certification of what you have been doing on your farm. So to determine eligibility, additionality, and estimate outcomes, carbon market developers usually need 3 to 5 years of historical data, and then also ongoing field data such as field boundaries, planting information, chemical and fertilizer applications, organic amendments, also harvest or yield information, as well as a list of conservation and tillage practices that are being used on the farm. So how long are the contracts and who's liable if something goes wrong? So contracts can range anywhere from 1 year to 3 years, 5 years, up to 10 years. Some of these are also renewable. During the contract period, the farmer is responsible for implementing the practices that remove carbon from the atmosphere, that store it in the soil, and continue to protect that stored carbon. So that's a really important part of it. We don't just want to store it in the soil, we want to continue to protect it while it's stored in the soil. So we all know that soil carbon is also at risk of returning to the atmosphere through unintentional and intentional reversals. So unintentional could be, field catches on fire, removes all your residue. That's really an unintentional consequence, hopefully. But there's also intentional reversals. You go out there and you plow the land that next year. all that carbon that you just stored in the soil is now going back up into the atmosphere. So it's really important that you understand those contract requirements and both concepts there, because an intentional reversal would likely put you at default in your individual program. So money matters. How can I make a market work for me? The average price for an ag carbon credit in the U.S. is about $20 right now. That's for a carbon credit. That ranges anywhere from $15 to $30. Per acre payments can range anywhere from $1 per acre to $34 an acre. So for most farmers, carbon market prices are not high enough to cover the cost of implementing a new practice, and they can be less than what you could receive from some federal government conservation programs that we've talked about, like EQIP, and also Partners for Conservation. But currently, some markets allow farmers to stack these carbon payments with government program payments to make practice adoption more affordable. So I'll talk about that in a minute. So how do I know which carbon market is right for me, and where can I get more information? So the answer really, again, just depends on you, your goals, and your own specific farming operation and the practices that you're already doing on those fields. So we recommend that any carbon market that you're looking into, review their website, reach out for additional resources. The Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership that Illinois Soy and AFT and others are a part of have generated some really good resources that take an honest broker approach to looking at these different markets. But review several of those resources and compare which one might be right for you. And I think in the future, Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership is really looking at ways that we can take this to the next level. How can we provide farmers and farm advisors with an incentive directory tool, which is a decision tree tool, if you will, where we can ask a few questions, or you can answer a few questions, and really start to narrow down the programs that you might be eligible for. So this graphic was put together by the Sustainable Ag Partnership. It just really gives kind of a simple look at the process in getting started with a voluntary carbon market from the beginning, when you first learn about the program, to when you sign up, complete an enrollment form, sign a contract, and really begin implementing those practices on that land. And again, kind of shows some of the difference between the offset markets and the inset markets, and then the verification process that will have to be done prior to getting those payments. So, part of this was, the title was Understanding all these different programs. Hopefully you have a little bit better understanding, or at least know where you can get some resources. But to be quite honest, this is all very confusing. It's been confusing for me over the last several years. We know it's confusing for farmers and for farm advisors. This cover crop incentive directory is available on ilsustainableag.org. And this sheet here is really just a portion of the overall incentive directory that identifies all the different programs available. The intent for this chart here is to really take a look at those stacking options. So as I mentioned earlier, there are opportunities to stack multiple programs together. The general rule of thumb is private programs can't be stacked with other private programs, and public programs can't be stacked with other public programs. But there are some other cases where that doesn't always work. So that's why this chart was put together, just to identify which programs could be stacked together. If you look at the fall covers for spring savings, FCSS, it shows that it can't be stacked with the federal and state programs. But if you were enrolled in Soil and Water Outcomes Fund or the Illinois Cover Crop Initiative through ADM, that program payment can be stacked with those private programs. So it's a really useful guide, especially when a lot of these payments alone are not enough to cover the complete cost of implementing a practice like cover crops. So that is the end of my presentation. I hope we have some time for questions. I'd be happy to answer any that you have. And Deanna does have a mic, so she's going to do her best to get that to you if you have a question.
The fall cover for spring savings, do you know when you find out if you've made it in that? I haven't heard anything.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's typically in March when you'll get an email from the Department of Ag. I did talk to them last week, and because of that pre-enrollment process, they've been able to get through those applications a lot faster. I think they mentioned they were already through about 70% of those. So once they get through 100% of them and verify the fields and boundaries, and that the 578 forms have been submitted, then they'll send that out and on all 140,000 acres. Yeah. I believe it is. Yeah.
I'm going to stop here first.
On the stacking, Chris, how are they policing that? How do they know from all the private, because there's a lot of private ones that you didn't mention up there too?
Yeah.
And how do they know if you're double dipping, so to speak?
On the private side, I don't know if I can answer that question, how they're monitoring that, other than you are signing a contract saying that you're not participating in other carbon market programs. So there could be some penalties that are listed in your agreement if they identified that were the case.
So I'm a bit of a mole because I work with NRCS and IDOA and SWCD. So can you speak to helping farmers navigate which programs would potentially be the best fit for them, because there's an alphabet soup and they all offer different things? And as a farmer, how do I come into the office and sort of gain some understanding of which conservation program would be the best for me to potentially pursue?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something that I used to do a lot of as a conservation planner for a soil and water conservation district. You know, my goal was always, it was not to sell a program. It was to help the farmer address their needs and work towards their goals. So ideally, a farmer comes in and says, "Hey, I'd like to do 80 acres of cover crops." And it's our job as planners to help them identify the best path. You know, if they want to try cover crops on that 80 acres for the next 5 years, then we might lean them towards the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. If they just say, "Hey, I don't want to get into a long-term contract, I just want to try it out, you know, get some money to help cover my seed cost," then we look at Partners for Conservation, you know. The other part of that is a lot of these programs, the state and federal programs, have been oversubscribed. And so it's a challenge to try to meet those needs. We've also been working closely through our ADM Regenerations program, working closely with the conservation districts to provide them with a small payment for telling farmers about regenerations, at least knowing that if you're fully subscribed on all your acres, that there are some other programs out there that are only 1 year in length that they could try to apply for. Another question there in the second row.
Some of these private programs pay you only if you increase your carbon, okay? And so how do you know whether it's even possible to increase your carbon? But I've seen a lot of reports in the last few weeks saying if your soil carbon content is already like 4%, increasing it is nearly impossible. So, I mean, if you have 1%, it might be easier than others. So what happens if you do all this work and you get no money? You just get mad or what?
Yeah, so it's in most cases, it's all kind of upfront. You know what you might be getting. There is the issue of additionality, you know, that I mentioned earlier. You know, if you already have cover crops, they're not going to pay you for doing cover crops in a lot of cases. There are some programs that do. But it's all computer-based generation. They have these computer models, that are looking at on your farm, your soils, what is the potential to increase, to capture carbon in your soils, and they're basing that. So, we talked about a $20 per acre, a $20 per ton price for a carbon credit. You may be only sequestering a quarter of a ton or a half of ton. So your payment, that's where those payment differences exist. So that might only be $5 an acre or $10 an acre, depending on the potential for sequestration. Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, Chris, in your opinion, these programs so far have been adopted or used minimally. In your opinion, is it because of there's still lack of an ideal program or lack of adequate funding in the existing programs?
Yeah, I think there hasn't been a lot of participation in many of the carbon markets. And regenerations through ADM is technically an offset or an inset market for Scope 3 emissions. So it is a carbon market. We've seen a lot of participation there. And I think one of the reasons is that it's one-year contracts. It also allows farmers that have been doing cover crops in the past to enroll. But I think overall, the payments aren't high enough for it to be a major driver. And I think we're going to have to see something much higher to get the middle adopters and others to start to move in this direction. One thing I will mention is 45Z tax credits, sustainable aviation fuel, ethanol. There's a lot of opportunities that will be coming out in the next couple of years that could provide farmers with additional premiums for lowering your carbon intensity scores on corn and soybeans, and specifically corn with ethanol production. And through that, we're looking at much higher payment rates than what we're currently seeing through the carbon markets. But there's still a lot yet to be determined on that process. Those tax credits are for the ethanol and fuel companies, and so the hope is that that they will have to pay farmers for low carbon intensity grown crops. Another question there.
So this just adds on to the comment that you made there. If we're going to be doing additionality all the time, would it be wise to wait until those opportunities present itself, or jump on something now and hope that we get grandfathered in?
Are you already doing practices, or there's, I guess, two different, I've heard the question, I've heard farmers say, well, I'm going to wait till these payments get higher before I start doing this. And others are saying, well, I'm already doing this, but I'm going to wait because I don't want to get into a program until payments are higher.
So we're looking into it. We're looking into it right now. So no, we've not adopted anything at this point. We're trying to, for our own operation, we're trying to minimize labor a little bit. So no-till, cover crop, all those things start coming into play where we're trying to figure out how to do it. So right now, today, we're not doing anything. So
I would say I never want to, encourage anybody to wait, but I know that question has came up a lot. From what we're seeing with the 45Z tax credits is that there may be an opportunity for farmers who planted cover crops last fall to take advantage of that for the crop being grown this year and harvested this coming fall. So I think we have to take a closer look at that for future years. So be thinking about, and hopefully we'll know more this summer about the status of some of those programs. And I would be thinking now about, if you're going to start doing cover crops, what fields make the most sense to do those in. I always focus on fields that are tile drained. We're going to see our greatest water quality benefits from those fields. Those fields are also the ones that dry out the fastest in the spring and make conservation practices much easier to manage. And then, of course, your more marginal fields or rolling fields that we see a greater benefit from early on. that aren't quite as resilient as some of our 4%, organic matter fields. So, but also I would, I think that's one of the benefit of some of the annual contract payments is that you're not getting yourself locked into multiple years of a program that may be paying less than what you might get in future years. Other questions? Yeah, got another one up front there. And as she's going up there, I'll just mention there's a few copies of the report in the back and also just a summary of the top 10 questions, along with the cover crop incentive directory from the Sustainable Ag Partnership.
I want to give you a really easy victory here. Please tell me your favorite success story as an RC or with conservation. What happened and what was the outcome?
Wow, great question. That wasn't an easy, I don't know. So I think over my time as a conservationist, I focused a lot on the structural practices, and it was, I surveyed and designed hundreds, if not thousands, of water and sediment control basins. I was always taught that it's better to have a guardrail at the top of the field than to have an ambulance at the bottom of the field, the bottom of the hill. And I always thought that was really about structural practices. And it wasn't until probably 2012, 2013, some of you may remember the Howard Buffett Foundation was doing starting to really heavily promote cover crops over in Decatur. They had a big seminar. And so it really got me thinking about cover crops and their ability to kind of be that guardrail up in the field and not letting our soil and our nutrients end up at the bottom of the field or the Gulf of Mexico for that matter. So I think I had a lot of great experiences, working with farmers and certainly I think once I started to transition more to pairing up structural practices with in-field management practices like cover crops and no-till, it really started to make a lot more sense for me from a conservation perspective overall. One last question, otherwise we'll finish things up. All right, Deanna, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Chris. And thank you all for attending this session. If you are a CCA attending in person, please don't forget to claim your CEU credit for the session. Sign-ups are near the registration table in the main hall. And if you are attending online, please read the CEU instructions that should be in the chat. Our next session will begin at 2 o'clock.
Hit it just once. On.
How you doing, man? How you been? Yeah, you didn't, man.
All right, if I could encourage you to take your seats, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the second session in the Partner Breakout Room at Soybean Summit. I am Deanna Burkhart, producer and Field Services Administrator for the Illinois Soybean Association, and today's room moderator. I'm pleased to introduce this session's speaker, Kevin K.J. Johnson from the Illinois Fertilizer and Chemical Association. He has been with IFCA since 2013 and has served as president since 2021. He is involved in the management of the IFCA, including oversight of regulatory and legislative issues and the development of programs that promote stewardship and safety for the nutrient and agrochemical industry. Before coming to IFCA, he worked on Capitol Hill and received a bachelor's in agribusiness and political science from Illinois State University. Today, KJ will discuss the global fertilizer and agrochemical market and the factors that impact chemical and fertilizer availability for Illinois farmers. He will also discuss strategies and the chemicals you need for your farm in the next growing season. Before we get started, as a reminder, please use the microphone during the Q&A period so others in the room and also online can hear your questions. Thank you, and please join me in welcoming KJ.
Is there a clicker at all? Thank you. Am I on? Now am I on? Okay. Well, thank you guys for coming to the breakout session. Again, I'm KJ Johnson with the Illinois Fertilizer and Chemical Association. See a lot of familiar names or faces in the room. What I'm going to talk about today is just what do we see going on in the industry on a few different things. Got a bunch of slides. We'll see if we get to most. I do want, one of the issues we are going to talk about, I know some of you, how many of you were here last night for the dinner? A few of you? We are going to talk about the herbicide strategy. I know Hector talked a lot about that one. That's one of the biggest issues I see. I guess what keeps me up at night. But some of that stuff will be repetitive. But I think it's that important issue that we need to talk about it a lot. Let's just talk about the industry as a whole. And I'm just going to say this is fertilizer. We belong to 3 national organizations, the Fertilizer Institute, Crop Life America that handles all the pesticides, and the Ag Retailers Association. Crop Life puts out actually a great report every year, and they actually give it to members of Congress. It's one of the first things that I lay on a congressional person's desk is the economic impact. This is the economic impact of the whole United States, 33,000 manufacturing jobs, actually 487,000 jobs total, direct jobs 400,000, actually retail jobs 56,000. That's just for national. If you look at Illinois, and we actually break this down by congressional districts, how the economic impact of fertilizer. There's 30,000 jobs that are somewhat tied to fertilizer or the ag industry here in the state. And we say we are actually a huge economic revenue with $2.3 billion in wages. So that's just a little background how important the fertilizer and chemical industry is from here. Before I go to the next slide, anybody remember where they were at on a Friday night, September 29th? You remember what happened that day or that night? Anyone want to take a guess? Bob? The Wrecking Two Topless. This is one of the, we got a call, John Rebholz on my staff, who's the ammonia guru, I would consider in the nation. We do a lot of ammonia training. We got a call from actually one of my former board chairmen from the Equity and said, hey, there's a major ammonia release in between Effingham and Teutopolis. We know it's a cargo transport load of ammonia. We don't know which way it's direction. We don't know if it was going to retail. We don't know anything. That was at 10:30 at night. Yeah. And you guys know I farm. Slept through the night, woke up at 5:30, and got about 20 new text messages that what was kind of updating what he was giving us. And it was still leaking and getting more information. And that whole day, was on the phone with federal agencies, the Illinois Department of Ag, what was going on. So here's the background, just so you guys know. There was a wreck earlier that afternoon on Route 70. They diverted everybody off to Route 40, and then around 8:30 that night, there was a wreck. It was a cargo tank, and I'm going to show you guys pictures, of 7,500 gallons in hydrous ammonia. And we'll see here, the truck took the ditch, and I'll show you more. It jackknifed. It punctured a 6-inch hole in the head of that cargo tank. There was 5 fatalities. 3 were at the farm location where it was at, and then 2 were actually pedestrians, one from Ohio, one from Missouri, in that incident. None was caused by the crash. All right, I'm going to say this way. There wasn't, the 2 that passed were actually in their vehicle, but it wouldn't crash, but it was engulfment. Around 500 residents with a 2-mile radius were evaluated. The actual NTBSB reported that there was 3,750 gallons of actual ammonia that was released out of that tank, out of the 7,500. And then the next day, NTSB was out there. So this is Teutopolis. Here's what actually happened, but we're going to give you a little better picture. So what happened? There's a curve in the road. Truck was going this way. There was a car that passed that gentleman with another car coming back this way. The gentleman, his father owned the trucking company, and this gentleman was in his late 20s. What probably is going to save him from more and more lawsuits is that he had dash cam in that truck that showed the whole incident in that vehicle. And when we talked to state police later that day, or Sunday, or Saturday night, Sunday, they said the key word is he did everything he had to avoid another crash. Because I think and I will tell you, if you have a company, have a bunch of trucks, dash cam might be something you want to look at just for legal purposes. This is the actual site. That's the truck. It actually turned that truck back around. This is the house place. This is, I would just say, energy utility company kind of siding place. That is the actual utility trailer it hit. And we're going to show you where it hit. But it literally turned that truck. He took the ditch, rolled on its side, and it turned that truck completely around. There's some pictures of the actual trailer. All the valves, everything else was completely intact. All the safety stuff that was, if it would have been a valve or anything like that, was still intact. That is actually the hole that it put in there. That is what put that hole. It hit the hitch of that trailer, that pintle hitch trailer, and put that incision in there. Let me just go back real quick. If you guys remember, when we talked to contacts that morning, that Saturday morning, about it, like, is it getting sealed? It has not still been sealed. It did not, that tank did not get sealed until about 2 o'clock that afternoon. It kept on releasing. They tried to put magnets on it to cut it off. They tried everything. They were actually at the point about flaming it off, but they finally got it to stick to get the pressure down on it. Another picture of it. That's a picture of the truck. Why I say this, and I'm going to talk about the next 2 slides or pictures of the next 2 slides. A lot of the coverage on this incident came back to the Department of Transportation of how they diverted stuff from there. We got questions, but I will tell you we probably ducked a big bullet on this one. But I will tell you, with ammonia, it is getting more and more under the microscope of what's going to go on. Now, here's what I will tell you what I worry about. I live here in, if anybody knows Champaign County, I live the next exit down from here, St. Joe. Go to church here on the west side of Champaign this fall. Was going to church on Sunday morning, saw this out on the west side of town. And you guys, most of you guys know, I farm with my family also. I do not want to tell us how we regulate this. But I will tell you, I took these 2 pictures. This one on the west side here. Pretty nice neighborhood stuff like that. Again, I don't want to tell farmers what to do, but if we have an incident in those type of positions, we are only going to get more regulation at us. I'm going to talk about pesticide preemption here later on. When we have pesticide preemption in the state, what we do not have in the state is fertilizer preemption. How many of you guys remember the spring of 19 when there was ammonia release up in Beach Park, Illinois, up on the Wisconsin border? We ducked some regulation because we did. How many of you guys have went through ammonia training down in the state of Illinois? That came off of that because of that. That was an agreement with us, the commodity groups, Farm Bureau, corn and soy, because of that. And I know some people don't love that, but I will tell you that the state senator up that way literally said, if you guys don't come up with some kind of training on this, we will put regulations out. And what she meant by that is, I'm not going to the state. You guys don't have pesticide or fertilizer preemption. That means I can go to the Lake County Board and put a proposal in, and if they want to ban ammonia in Lake County, they can. So we have to get ahead of this. This stuff now, I just think, why I put this picture up there is just, there is going to be more scrutiny on ammonia going forward. But we have to have it in the industry. I got one of my guys in this room is on our board. The industry moves probably 70% of all nitrogen in the state is probably through ammonia. A lot of it's in the fall. Our retail survey showed there's at least not every pound of nitrogen in the fall is put on in the fall, but half of every corn acre is at least put on in the fall. We cannot switch all that to spring. The industry cannot handle it. There's not enough storage that make that all happen. So we had to protect ammonia, but we also know if there's common sense regulations, there might be looked at after this incident. Let's talk about fertilizer markets. I'm going to kind of touch about what I see going on. I am not a predictor of this. I just see what is out there. Here in the last 2 years, if you looked at the fertilizer market, it's been pretty rocky all over, ups and down. I will tell you, these are all the things that affect the fertilizer market, but we're going to go to the next one. I remember IFCA always saying half their soybeans are exported out of Illinois. Well, I will tell you, 90% of the fertilizer in the world is moved outside where it starts from. We are even more affected by global issues than the soy industry is. And if there's a blimp outside our borders, it's going to affect our issues. I put this out here, global consumption. How many guessed we had been number 3 on the nitrogen market? Actually, China's the biggest one of all. They're the consumers, phosphates, nitrogen, and potash. I was trying to find a little bit better one than what this is, but this just kind of shows the rockiness of the ammonia markets, what was going on. It has flattened back out again. I think the lowest we got was the week of Farm Progress show, and now it's kind of ticked back up, but I think we're more in a sideways trade range from now. Cost inputs. I put this out here. If you take nothing out of this fertilizer talks I give you, take this. Everything nitrogen starts with is natural gas. Whatever happens in natural gas is going to be a direct correlation on what ammonia is going to do and all other ones, but specifically ammonia. We put this together with the TFI. This talks about just the price, but this box here is the number of companies that are actually producing. Right now, there's 16 different companies that are producing ammonia. And this is how many plants are. What you're seeing is, I think it's going to be really hard in the future going and building another plant, but I think it will be retrofitted or expanded. I don't see, the last one that was actually built was in Weaver, Iowa. You guys from the western side of the state, when Weaver, Iowa got built, that started off at $1.9 billion start off, and it was well over 4.5 when it was all said and done. And I will tell you, Iowa, Terry Branstad, that was the governor at Iowa at the time a few years ago, literally rolled out the red carpet and said it will get built. And there were still setbacks on that, on regulation. Would I love to see one here in Illinois built? Absolutely. Do I think it could get through the permitting process? Absolutely not. I'm realistic about that. I'm going to switch over this. Let's get to the bigger thing. Russia plays a huge part in our markets. When we saw ammonia go up, it's all because they're natural gas, but they control a lot of the other stuff. Their export of ammonia is 23% of the world. So when they say they're going to shut down stuff, it affects stuff. They're a big exporter of urea too, but the potash and the phosphates are out. So my biggest worry, I tell people, and I've said in different interviews, I think fertilizer prices are in a range-bound price right now. I think that's about 80% true. The only 20% that changes that is Putin does something different. If something comes out of Putin that he's going to rock the boat, whatever I just told you is out the boat. But just tell me what's going to go on with Ukraine. Because all the fertilizer prices started ticking up when Putin did what? Invaded Ukraine. That's what started a lot of this. Anybody know about Belarus? They are pretty much a dictatorship. They are 22% of the world's potash. For a time there, no country was dealing with them. Belarus potash is something huge to them. Really, really huge. And they were putting sanctions on those companies. Only Russia was taking part of their stuff. We talk about sanctions and all that stuff. That came from that. And there's a big thing. Russia, they're curbing all exports. They're huge in the urea market, but phosphates too. When the prices really skyrocketed, China was not exporting any phosphates whatsoever. Now, we're going to see a little later that they're kicking some of that back out, but it's not like it has been. The biggest thing I think drivers going into this year it's all weather. I mean, we talk about here, but we'll also talk about Brazil. This is the biggest one if you want to really talk about geopolitical unrest, what happens with Russia, what's going on in the Red Sea, and then what goes on in China. Microeconomics, some of that, but then supply chains. I would be honest, supply chains, we put it 4 because I think it is number 4. I think the geopolitical and that is going to dictate fertilizer markets more than anything. Supplies, nitrogen from key regions. What we're seeing, again, Russia is exporting, but it's not at the clip it was before. Same thing, capacity in Europe. And people say, what does it matter? It's Europe. Well, what we saw during the price hike was Europe shut all those off because, we do have a slide, if you look at our natural gas compared to Europe's natural gas, 10x. If it's $2 here, it's going to be 20 or something more higher than that. So that capacity still really hasn't came back online. Imports, again, if you look at everything, we're not taking imports like we have been. It is coming back up than what it was in its lows, but it's still not back to, I would say, pre-COVID numbers. Same thing, here's the big one. Everybody talks about nitrogen, but the MAP and DAP, China is still holding on to their stuff. They just see it as, we're going to keep that home. We had to feed our people first. We're going to feed our agricultural first. And they are back to exporting, but not at the clip it was on a 5-year average. Same thing with potash production in Belarus and China. It is not back to what it was before. But I will tell you this. This goes back to the world market part of stuff. We don't actually get that much potash outside. I mean, where does most of our potash come from? Canada. 2/3 of the potash that comes into the state of Illinois is railed in here from Canada. But when there was sanctions on Belarus and Russia shut it off, that affected everybody else, and all those people were going back on the world market trying to buy. So it drove everything up. I'll end on this on the fertilizer end of stuff. What I think the key drivers are. Urea prices have strengthened a little bit in 24. People say, why do we care about urea? The world nitrogen trades off urea prices. The world nitrogen market is everything is tied to urea prices. We think about ammonia or UAN, it's more tied to what everything else is tied to urea. Global ammonia prices decline on a weak seasonal demand. We actually had a pretty good demand here. Actually, I think we had a great demand all fall. Especially the southern 2/3 of Illinois was pretty dry. If you wanted to get stuff on, you got it on. I think we are ahead of the game going in, at least here in Illinois, going into the spring season on what has to get done. On the P stuff, China exports restrictions have kept global supply tight. The key, if you're a fertilizer guy, is that is the biggest thing. When does China say we're going to open that back up? And if you talk about the case, North American supply, relatively tight. It is, but I think most guys got, at least here in this part of the world, got what they wanted on going into the future. I do think the P levels will remain strong, though. If we're looking at long-term everything, I think we're in, again, nothing happens global. I think we're in a range-bound prices on ammonia and most of the stuff. I don't think we're going to go $1,600 ammonia, but I don't think we're going right back to $550 ammonia, though, either. I think we're kind of in a range where we're at. I throw this in there, but this is just more, how does this play into the factor of the spring? What does the drought monitor look like, of what demand is? Here's what I tell you guys. Everything is by Henry Hub natural gas spot prices. When everything went crazy, this is what was driving that. And now we're back into this price range. But here's the European gas. When it was $7 here, it was $47 over there. That's how much price difference there was between Europe and now. And now they're back to this $15 level for natural gas futures. Let's talk about chemical issues that are coming in, what we see in 24. I got to put this out there. I don't love talking about this. Misuse complaints. If I never have to remember 2019 ever again on misuse complaints, I'll be a happy soul. We are going back into a better place we are. I would love to say we're going to get back to these levels. I mean, it was always this. I think with so much stuff reported in the last few years, I would love to say we're going to go back to those levels. I think we're lying to ourselves. I think there's just more people know how to put out those complaints that we're going to be in more of this. But the numbers have come down. If you look at the blue line, that's when they started recording the dicamba complaints. They were actually down to 37 complaints. Here's the one I think we're gonna relate to. Purple line, IDNR complaints or tree complaints. That's what we're gonna work on. Anybody get the News Gazette here in Champaign? This was your spring headline one day. There was just southwest of here in Seymour, there was a bunch of tree complaints. This is the one that I think we're gonna have to deal with more and more. Talking to our environmental friends down in Springfield, when we have to have those conversations, tough conversations, I always remember them telling us, you kill each other's beans, that's one thing, whatever. You kill the trees, then we're gonna have real issues. There's a hotbed of complaints on tree complaints. And you guys down in Washington County at all? I know my board's probably sick of me hearing say this, but we're gonna have to deal with that. The pin oaks down there, any kind of oaks are showing some kind of symptoms down in that way. How do we get a hold of that issue? Let's kind of focus on Springfield stuff. I will tell you, there's very few fertilizer-related stuff on going down to Springfield, more on the nutrient loss reduction strategy. It is all based on fertilizer or pesticides. The anti-bills are heavy, and we're going to go through some of that stuff. Talking more chemistries. Seed treatments, we're going to talk about that. A growing concern on seed treatments. We're seeing legislation. Climate and soils is a good thing. We're working on some of that. Actually, Chris, you talked here, working with him on some stuff that might be but local activism. I've never seen where you will get a very, very conservative, but a very, very little person agree on one thing, and that is local control. And we are doing it because we are more pushing for state control and stuff, but we're going to talk about this. Some bills that we are watching, this is one that just got dropped a couple days ago, and we got a hearing on it next Thursday. Got pushed to Senate Ag Committee. I talk about fertilizer preemption. Anybody know what pesticide preemption means? It's probably one of the best things that Burleson can't answer in the back. One of the most positive things we have in the industry. Pesticide preemption means that the state of Illinois regulates that pesticide rather than Champaign County, the city of Urbana, or anything like that. The director of ag has full control over that. Now someone like, well, I don't want the director of ag. I will tell you right now, that is where you want. If you're going to try and battle every local town, stuff like that, it's going to be hard. There's a piece of legislation put in by Laura Fine from Chicago, which says a city of 2 million or county of 2 million or more, and if you go dig through that, that is Cook County, can regulate their own pesticides. Now, the city of Chicago does have authority to regulate its own pesticide, but they still defer to the state of Illinois. What this would do would let any town in Cook County, without saying Cook County, just says 2 million or more, but any subdivision, any Hyde Park or Eagle Crest subdivision could ban pesticides. This is an issue for IFCA that there's no negotiate on. We will fight for preemption with all it's worth. We're going to have this conversation next week. Do I think this actually moves? No. I think there's controls in the Senate to get it stopped. If it goes to the House, that's another thing. The House is pretty raucous right now of letting stuff move. But this is a very big issue that we are watching, probably our number one concern in the state of Illinois right now. There's a dicamba ban out there. To be honest with you, a lot of these I think are what I call fisher bills, people just trying to get by to see what goes out there. I don't think this is going anywhere, but it's just out there. We got a neonic ban. Anybody know what your neonics are? That's your seed treatments. This would ban it on state of Illinois lands, but anybody farming in U of I ground, that's a state of Illinois land. So there is some conversation about that. That bill has been out there for a while, it's the only reason I bring this back up is it's been out there every year that I've been around, but the state of New York did ban all neonics and seed treatments starting in what is it, Bertelson? But it's all on all agricultural pre-owned. It's a bad. And that then it was, hey, we're going to ban it, and then we're going to give exceptions out. It was pretty hard and firm. It's done. It is done. So I think there'll be a renewed effort in a lot of states, not just here in Illinois, on seed treatments. There's a glyphosate ban. That's going to come back. Chlorpyrifos, any of you guys know what chlorpyrifos? That's a Dow legacy product. It's going to get started, weeded out, but somebody thought we need to put it out there. Okay, let's talk about the fun subject of the day. Again, how many were you at the dinner last night and heard Hector speak? How many of you guys, how many of you even heard about the herbicide strategy? This is one of those issues that keeps me up at night. Herbicide strategy is because the Center for Biological Diversity has sued EPA over many times about that they are not taking Endangered Species Act into how they regulate pesticides. That's what it boils down to at the end of the day. I will tell you, EPA has lost many cases on this, and now they called it the mega suit, multiple cases that they have lost on this one. And now EPA is tasked to put this out. They're going to do herbicides, they're going to do insecticides, rodenticides, but herbicides was the first one they put out. The person was honest, I don't think EPA loves this because it is going to be a ton more work onto them, but they are being ordered by the courts to move this. I'm going to say, how many of you guys used Enlist last year? Okay. How many of you did the pick list? There's a few. How many even knew that was on there? This is what we're going to look at. This is what it all comes down to on the Endangered Species Act, is these pick lists and getting to different scenarios, 4 to 6 credits, but in certain areas you might have to get to, like if you listened to Hector's talk last night, 7 or 9 credits to get to this. As my personal opinion, it's going to be hard because I would tell you, I own a little land, but I also rent some land. Some of the options that are on these contours or buffer strips, can I just go do that if I rent a piece of land and just say I'm going to go put that out there? Absolutely not. This is going to be a larger conversation with landowners, how this goes forward. It is going to be definitely a more complex label from here. You're going to have to keep more records on this. One of the biggest things as our members, the vast majority of our members are the retailers. We've always known that when we spray a herbicide, if I spray it for Bob, if it drifts, it's not Bob's problem. It is whoever's in that cab of that applicator will have the penalties against them. But on this, if I ask Bob, have you done all your pick list info on Enlist? And Bob just says yes, and he hasn't, and it comes back, how can I verify that Bob did that, all that? It's going to be a whole lot more bigger issue on us. And we're asking EPA, how does that look like? I definitely think there's going to be more buffers on everything. There's conversation about that last night more. We're going to be looking at pollinators more and what's a treated area. Here's the biggest one, I think, is the $64,000 question. What does Department of Ag do? I would tell you Department of Ag is pretty overworked on the pesticide department right now. It's taken them a whole year to get through pesticide complaints right now. If you add this onto them, it is going to put them over. I know it's called NASDA. It represents all the state departments of Ag. They're going back to EPA and asking the question, and I know their members, like the Illinois Department of Ag, are asking, hey, if you put this out there, are you going to give us appropriation to hire more people? Because we don't got the manpower to do it. So there's still a whole lot more questions. And I will tell you, the whole thing with the herbicide strategy is there's more questions than answers on this. What's driving it? And as I told you, it's all about the lawsuits at the end of the day. I'll go through some. So just so you guys know what has changed, 1972, FIFRA. Everything we know on pesticide, it's like the Illinois Pesticide Act out of the national, it regulates all pesticides. It's a risk-benefit statute, no reasonable effect on the environment. No unreasonable effects, okay? That's how that reads. But the Endangered Species Act was passed just 1 year later. It was 50 last year, and it's zero. There's zero. If it kills one endangered species, it's a no-go. It's a whole different level of regulation. What we're going to talk on here, Endangered Species Act, does it jeopardize or contain, any, this is the key word, any listed species or destroy any critical habitat. The other thing that's going to be, what we're going to see going on is the habitat. How close are you to the habitat? And again, if you listened to Hector's thing last night, he showed some of those areas that was pretty good size. If you looked at Illinois, one of his slides was 2/3 of the state, trying to narrow some of that down. If any of you are in northern Illinois, one of these that will be affected is the rusty past bumblebee. Will be a direct effect. You go off over. Now, before I go to the next slide, I want to check just time, we're on time. When you think of the Endangered Species Act, what do you think of? Throw it out there, guys. Wolf, owl. Yep. I'll go do this real quick. Here's what I'm pulling out. There are 1,600 endangered species. 940 of them are plant-based. This is where we worry about. This is where Dr. Hager and I go have a beer and figure out how do we hit our head against the wall without doing it. Because why? Prime example, glyphosate. Glyphosate don't kill giant ragweed anymore, but it still kills a lot of other stuff. How does that affect, if it's an endangered species, a plant-based species, on that? But that affects everything long term. Let me go back. I want to give you this one. Jake Lee is the head of the pesticide division. I actually know Jake personally. Worked on the Hill formula with him for a little bit. I like Jake personally. But he got ahead of the pesticide division. He made this comment, and this is where it scared everybody. Pesticide program acknowledged that the agency has registered and registered pesticides without thoroughly using the ESA process for decades. That's what scares us. They are admitting to this. I'll go through. So, have you already been affected by ESA? Absolutely. How many of you guys sprayed dicamba the last couple of years, and you guys are in one of these counties and have to go to the bigger buffer zones? That is all part of ESA. How many of you guys have been in a county that had a buffer zone and then it was taken away? Anybody live in Champaign County? Part of that. It changed every year. This is what part of the ESA. I'm going to skip through some of this stuff. Some other stuff I want to talk about. This goes to this Russell Pass bumblebee, the areas. And again, there's more different maps out there, or what is out there. But if you are in that, you are going to have to comply, or you're not going to use any of those types of products. I got 5 minutes. I'm going to quick go through some stuff on DC, your government work. As much as I think Springfield's screwed up, then I look at DC and it's even more screwed up. Let's just talk about Farm Bill. Jonathan, I go way back with Jonathan, talking about Farm Bill. I actually do think we're going to get something done this year. As much I'm cynical about that, I think it is a pretty flat-looking Farm Bill, nothing new. He talked about the CBO scoring. There is no new money out there for anything. I think it's going to be really hard for new programs to be done. What are we looking at? Critical minerals, adding potash and phosphate. And that just gives more protection to those things as critical. If there's a shutdown, it helps us. Biostimulants, there's a big call on biostimulants. One thing that we're watching is that there's some kind of standard with biostimulants, just not, you want to say snake oils, there's just not snake oils out there. Having a better part of this. TSP, Lisa Martin, this is our big issue. Helping get CCA advisors be able to write nutrient management plans. I know NRCS does a lot of that right now, but they are pretty far behind. We're asking that CCAs can write those nutrient management plans through the Farm Bill. Right now they cannot. And then just streamlining some of the conservation practices that we're backing. We actually want to see conservation practices put out there, but if there's a streamlining of some of those. Here's your key figures. Debbie Stabenow from Michigan, who's the Democratic lead. Debbie's a pretty nice lady. Jonathan actually used to work for her, but she is retiring at the end of the year. I think Jonathan made the comment last night, and I actually agree with him. This is her last go-around. I think she actually does want to pass something. I think there will be a push for her to get it done. Bozeman, I like John, but can they get something done? Here's the thing, and we'll talk about this later. I think the Senate's going to flip to Republican. If you're John Bozeman, do you help Debbie, or do you say, I'll try and write it next year? That's the biggest thing, I think, the conversation. G.T. Thompson is the lead in the House. He's from Pennsylvania. Really good guy. But he announced about a month ago he's got prostate cancer. I think that slows a little bit of him down on some stuff. How much is their push in the House on that? And then David Scott out of Georgia from the Atlanta area. Decent guy, but his main focus is food and nutritional. Where does that drive from? And as you guys know, I used to work on farm bills all the time. 84% of the total funding of the farm bill is going to be nutritional stuff. It is not crop insurance or that. It's the big part of that. This is one I want to show you. How much has Congress moved in the last Congress? We've only enacted 30 bills. Now, if you like that nothing passes, it's great. But I think that's why the Republicans are probably going to lose the House. They pretty much have a 2-seat majority. Dems think they can flip that in New York and California right now. Here's the House makeup. Here's what I want to get. If you're a really political insider, Cook Political Report puts out a bunch of stuff. This is the toss-ups they have. They actually have more toss-ups in GOP districts than Dems. That gives you a good report that he thinks it's going to go that way. And again, they really only got to flip 2-3 seats, and the Dems are control. Now here's the flip side. The Dems and independents must defend 23 seats. I actually think the Senate's going to flip to Republican. The Republicans, I will tell you right now, we're only going to pick up 2 seats. One is Manchin in West Virginia. Let's just be honest. Do we think another Dem's going to win West Virginia right now? Probably not. Stabenow is open. I think that will be probably one of the largest spent seats out there on stuff. The Republican, their seats that are all open are pretty, I would say, safe out there. Tester, Montana is up. I think they could get a good run of money for him, and there's a few others. That is all I have. I went through pretty quickly a lot of that. Questions, thoughts, fertilizer prices, herbicide strategy, or just what's going on in Springfield or DC? Guys, I thank you very much. If you have anything, let me know. Last thing I'll leave with you guys, we are going to work with Soybean on a legislative event on March 6th. We'd love to see you down in Springfield. But I think our groups, as all commodity groups, that means us, soy, corn, Farm Bureau, beef, pork, especially in Springfield, are going to have to lock arms together to stop some of the stuff. Or if we're going to even move anything, like on a state tax, there's some talks, I didn't bring up a state tax. We must be interlocked together. With this General Assembly, how it is, if they see any differences of where we're at on opinions, I don't think we get stuff passed. And I think it's going to be more than ever that us commodity groups or ag organizations are all on the same page with each other. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, KJ. And thanks to all of you for attending the session. And another reminder, if you're a CCA attending in person, please don't forget to claim your CEU credit for this session. Sign-ups are near the registration table in the main hall. And if you are attending online, please read the CEU instructions in the chat. Our final breakout session will begin at 3 o'clock. And during the break, I would encourage you to visit our partners in the trade show area and also the students that are participating in the student research poster contest. Thanks again for attending. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third and final session of today's partner Breakout. I am Deanna Burkhart, Producer and Field Services Administrator for the Illinois Soybean Association, and thank you all for attending this session. I'm pleased to introduce this afternoon's speaker, AJ Woodyard of Advanced Agrilytics. AJ is the Research Agronomy Lead with Ag Ingenuity Partners, the research division of Advanced Agrilytics. In that role, he is responsible for bringing innovative research concepts and performance insights to industry partners. With his previous work with high-yield growers across the United States and unique experience with ultra-early planted, high-management soybeans, AJ brings a practical approach to field-scale spatial research. He holds a bachelor's and master's degree from the University of Illinois in Crop and Weed Sciences, and remains involved in his family farming operation in East Central Illinois, bringing his research concepts back home. This afternoon, AJ will discuss more about a novel approach to soybean variety characterization that can more accurately inform placement decisions and provide insight into variety-specific management, making the connection between branches and bushels. Before we get started, just a reminder to please use microphones during the Q&A period so that others in the room and those online can hear your questions. Thank you, and please join me in welcoming AJ.
All right, first check. Can everybody, let me make sure I get this. Can we hear me okay? Sound good? Okay, perfect. Well, that was, appreciate the introduction. That I obviously didn't write that because I cannot write that well, so that sounded way better than what I actually am. This is always, and I really appreciate the Soybean Association allowing me the opportunity to come in. This is fun for me because most probably wouldn't know it based on my sister's last name not being the same anymore, but my sister is a part of the ISA and presented a couple sessions before. And so, you know, I'm accustomed to her being AJ's little brother, and when I come here, the ISA staff treats me as Jennifer's older brother. I don't have a name now, so I know how she's felt all her life. But I also know that she must not have made the agenda because she would have known better than to put me in the last time slot. So, you know, I'll be here till 5 o'clock. I hope all of you don't have anywhere to be after 4. So, but really do appreciate the opportunity and want to share a unique concept or unique approach that our group at Advanced Agrilytics has developed and patented around soybean variety characterization, and ultimately also get into maybe some unique insights into how we think about taking this characterization not only to placement but also to management of varieties. And so kind of before I get into the nuts and bolts and the details of that approach, I do think it's probably good for me to give a little bit of background, because how many people in the room have heard of Advanced Agrilytics? Okay, more than I would have expected. So just a very brief background then, since most have. Our group is relatively new. We've rapidly expanded since 2019, so about 4 years in the Midwest. We operate in the states in green, and we've got two different business units. One that works directly with growers on basically year-round agronomic guidance and advice, from recommendations across the board in corn and soybeans and wheat as well. And then we have a second division of our business called Ag Ingenuity Partners, which is focused on working business to business, so working with major partners in the industry from nutrient use efficiency, sustainability, biologicals, the seed side, crop protection, fertility. We work in all those business units and bring kind of our unique approach to research into other business units and maybe bring some approaches that they're not able to do internally to look at their products. So that's the two business units of ours. The Ag Ingenuity Group is also really important for funneling some of the research ideas into our grower direct business on Advanced Agrilytics. But you know, as I look at this, and for those that you know, the introduction kind of covered this, but most that probably know me, I've got a long history of being a aficionado of soybeans, very passionate about soybeans. Really enjoyed the conversation from Chris this morning, and there's quite a few things I can key back in on that he brought up as well. And if anybody was in the previous session, you know that Connor talked about pods per acre and seeds per pod and weight per seed in the soybean session previously, and the importance of those three pieces for the yield equation. And I've always been a big advocate that those are the three things that we have to understand, and they're the three things that we can influence in soybeans. If we can impact all three of them, we get a major win. But in most cases, if we can just impact two of the three, pods per acre and weight per seed, that's a huge win. I've got a whole bunch of things here on the slide that Connor covered really well in his session, but are things that I think of as just today prerequisites. I mean, when I started after high yield soybeans back in 2015, there wasn't a ton of early planted soybeans at that time. It was still kind of an early concept. Fungicide and insecticide had been in the market, but was maybe starting to really gain momentum. We had some seed treatments, but we were really seeing some more novel seed treatments brought into the marketplace at that time. So we developed a system over years that consistently produced more yield. And so you got these things, I would say, are the core foundational pieces over years that we quickly realized they were foundational for success. Interestingly for me, so 4 years ago when I left BASF and made a change to Advanced Agrilytics, part of that was a drive for new tools and new innovations and a new ability or a new way to be able to look at things, an entrepreneurial spirit, so to speak, because farmers were coming to me at that point and saying, hey, we have really moved our yields over the last several years, implementing a lot of these approaches, and for some reason you guys are never happy, because then it was, well, what else you got? What's next? And everybody's constantly looking for what's that next competitive advantage I can obtain in the marketplace. And I'm going to be honest with you, it's been pretty tough sledding the last few years in finding those next big hammers. We haven't found a planting date just magically arrive out of thin air in Illinois. So I have the little fruit tree on the right-hand side because I think we plucked a whole bunch of low-hanging fruit in this base system, and then it became what's next. And there's a lot of different areas that we've talked about and we've explored. We heard about some different, maybe novel concepts this morning, but quite frankly, none of them have just been a clear slam dunk. And so part of my motivation to come to Advanced Agrilytics was to try to get into an environment where we could think differently about soybeans and try to drive a next level of change. And I want to show this because I think this is really critical to understanding what we're going to get into in the conversation today. Core to our approach and the way I think about everything I approach today, from a nitrogen program in corn to fertility to biologicals when we test biologicals, all the way to soybeans and characterizing varieties. We start with environment, we isolate mechanism, and we view yield as an outcome. And so I'm gonna go through these pieces here quickly just to make sure everybody's tracking. View yield as an outcome. We'll start there. How many in the room think you can accurately predict field by field what your yields are going to be in 2024? I don't have any takers. So why is that? And I do know a lot of people in this room, so I will pick on people if we don't get audience participation. So why don't we think we can accurately predict it today? We don't know the yield. I heard Mother Nature, I heard weather. There's not a really reliable way, but basically it's because, as Chris referenced this morning, we can't predict Mother Nature at a 50% success rate a day ahead of time, let alone 6 months ahead of time. So we have no clue what Mother Nature is going to throw us. So we can all agree that yield is unpredictable, right? Yield is just an outcome. It's an outcome of the influencers that occur during that season. So what about environment? If we start with environment, and we'll do a little caricature here. So I've got acre A, and forgive me, I am not an artiste, so this isn't pretty, but I think it'll get the idea across. I've got acre A, darker soil, probably higher organic matter in the lower landscape. I've got acre B up in the higher landscape, a lighter looking soil type. If I ask the question, and if 2024 is a dry year, which one of these acres is going to get dry first? Acre A or acre B? This isn't a trick question. B, yes, very good. Okay, now, which acre is going to get dry first if 2024 is a wet year? Sometimes I trick people with that one. I got to think about that one for a minute. Yeah, it's acre B. So is environment subfield environment predictable within the field? If you know what weather is, yes, but we know that there are some predictabilities to the subfield acre and the environments within a field. There is more predictability there than trying to predict yield today. A lot of those attributes are not going to change year over year. So then here's what I think of as a special sauce and what our business does, and that's isolating mechanism. And I could talk about mechanisms all day that are influenced in those different environments and the influence that, or the importance of understanding mechanism in an environment to make management decisions. But I'm going to talk specifically about the mechanism of building soybean yield today. And I think we would all agree that one of the challenges about soybeans is when you think you've got them figured out, you don't. And trying to figure them out is about is going to be about as fun as beating your head against that wall for 2 hours straight. It's a challenging crop to understand because of the nature of soybeans being willing to compensate and maybe the lack of what we would think of as repeatability. So as we started off on trying to think about a new way to classify and understand variety characterization, because we knew getting the right variety on the right acres was going to be really important to maximize yield, we had to find a repeatable mechanism, something that year in and year out would be repeatable, that we could rely on, that then would allow us to pair it with the known of environment. And if we could get those two things right, then it increases our probability of winning. Because ultimately, what we want to do in this room as growers, same in our operation, if it's a good year for all the farmers, I want to be a little bit better than the good. If it's a bad year, I want to be better than those that are bad. We want to consistently try to increase our probability of winning. If we can describe environment and we can isolate and describe mechanism and put those two things together, it increases our probability of winning. So this was actually a field we were in 2020, and I was with a few of our team members, and we were talking, and one of the founders of Advanced Agrilytics was out there in the field with us, and he was asking me about what I look for when I think about soybeans. And I said, well, and a lot of people in this room, especially in central Illinois, will remember Asgrow 36X6. And I said, the 36X6 was a variety that I remember really well in that if you planted it early, it yielded exceptionally well. But if you planted it later in the year, it just became a bean. And he made a profound statement to me that will stick with me forever. He said, if it's repeatable, it's measurable. You just need to know what to measure. And that was what led us down this path of finding something in a mechanistic standpoint that would be repeatable in soybeans that we can measure year over year. Why is this important? Well, I think you probably all have had the experience of maybe being overjoyed with an outcome of yield that's occurred in a season in a field, and maybe sometime been disappointed in an outcome that's occurred. And we started doing work and these are whole field strips of multiple varieties, and you can see, there's variability across these strips, within the strips and between products, right? And so if I've got that red circle and the blue circle, what do you think are the differences between those two environments? What do you think is the difference between the red and the blue circle?
Elevation.
Yeah. Yep. What do you think is the higher elevation? Yeah, that is a good point. So this was a dry year, and the red circle is the higher acre. So if we look at a 3D image, you can pretty clearly see there's an elevation change that existed in that field. And we can also start to note, though, that between products, there are some differences in how they handle each of those environments too. And this is what I think is the unique nature of our business model, is the ability to parse out and separate that performance within each of those environments and really be able to see that, one variety may be really good up on that knob and not so good in the lower acre, and vice versa. and parse out and understand those differences that are occurring at a subfield level. So saturated, water-limited acres in the red and the blue. Essentially, all of this led us down the path of a mechanism. And, you know, in 2020, we went on a broad-scale effort to look at everything we could in soybeans. We harvested plants multiple timings throughout the year. We looked at plant mass. You know, we looked at number of nodes on June 21st at the summer solstice. We were looking for anything that we could correlate to subfield performance and draw back to a mechanism that would lead to understanding performance at a subfield level. And all through the season, we were kind of thinking, man, I don't know that plant biomass is going to be the story. I don't know that total number of nodes is going to be the story. And then we got to the end of the year, and we decided, you know, we're going to go out and harvest individual plants. We're going to bring them back, and luckily I've got a really good team that literally hand-shelled. This year we hand-shelled about 150,000 pods within our organization. And what we uncovered out of all that is that where varieties built their yield was a direct correlation to how they performed at the subfield level. And so I've got two examples here, on the left and on the right. I think we can all agree on the left, we probably got a variety that's branching a little more. On the right, one that's more main stem, right? What have we been historically taught about soybeans? If you give them space, what do all soybeans do? Branch. All soybeans compensate, right? And that's a factual statement. What is also true is that the ability or the magnitude to which they compensate is very, very different. And that was the magic pill in all of this work that we did. So we had gone through a process once we uncovered, and for multiple years we were able to correlate back where plants were building yield, and we'll get back into the characteristics of this, but where plants were building yield directly correlated to subfield performance, and where they had their best performance within a field or across an operation. If you looked at, hey, what type of variety do I want on my farm? And we classified these into two groups. We had the high VPI products, so we patented this, what we call our variety profile index. And instead of saying variety profile index every time, I'm going to shorten it to VPI. So we had high VPI products and we had low VPI products. And we had this wide range within the industry of how much varieties would compensate with branching to make up yield. So left, high VPI, right, low VPI, branch yield, primarily main stem. Why did this matter? And it's really interesting, and this is kind of fascinating because frankly it's a bit counterintuitive to what was maybe out in the industry at times. So we may have thought at one point that, hey, if we have a stress acre, what type of bean were we trying to get onto a stress acre? What were we historically taught in terms of the type of bean we wanted to put on a stress acre? Defensive, but what kind of characteristics? So if I go back, and I've done quite a bit of this, you look up old extension articles, it was get varieties that can cover the rows as quickly as possible. And oftentimes it was referenced get branching varieties that can make sure they close the rows on a stress acre. Now, while I totally agree that you want to close the rows as quickly as you can on a more transitional acre, what we also know, and if we look at these two charts, this is essentially yield stability. And you're looking at the main stem as we increase nighttime temperature. So this is a stress. You could name any number of stresses that you want to name, and they're all going to act the same. But we're increasing nighttime temperature, and we're looking at the effect on yield, or main stem weight in this case. So main stem and branches. So look, as we increase nighttime temperature, what happens with our branch yield? That's the first yield that starts to decrease. We see stability on the main stem. If we're going to abort yield under stress, the first place that's going to be kicked off is off the branches. So there was background in the literature to say that it was very likely that a product that's more main stem is going to perform better on a more transitional acre. We were just able to start looking at performance, parse out subfield acres, and pair that together and say we can absolutely validate on stress acres. You want to make sure you're more main stem. When you get into environments that you can take advantage of branching, then there's an opportunity with a more branching variety. I want to make one thing clear. This doesn't define yield potential. You can have high yielding branching varieties. You can have high yielding main stem varieties. What it helps to guide you on is to make sure you get them placed as well as you possibly can to take advantage of their characteristics. So if I just sort of summarize the characteristics of high and low VPI products. So we start on the left with our high VPIs or our high branching varieties. We're obviously, the strengths here, we're building more yield from branches. Within that, those varieties will excel when they have an environment that supports branching. So I go back, let's just make sure we're all tracking. I go back to acre B, or acre A and acre B. If I got a variety that wants to branch a lot, where do I want it to be? Right here. Take advantage. We've got the environment to take advantage of all that additional branch yield and to support it. So as soil, water, and organic matter increase, so does the performance potential of that type of a variety in that environment. Where we get risk with these high VPI or high branching varieties, they cannot support that yield component as well on their branches if you get one of two things. If you get dry weather or you get transitional acres. And you know, I think this has been really eye-opening to me as I think about 2022 and 2023, both pretty, especially dry early seasons, but in some places dry for a lot of the season. And if we start to aggregate data and we look at known products that are in the high VPI camp and known products that are in the low VPI camp, and I tell you, we all know that 2022 and 2023 were both dry years. Which of those buckets do you think had better performance overall, knowing that, across the board? High or low products? Yeah, the low VPIs, the last 2 years have been more consistent performers. 2021, we had some knock the socks off high yields with some of these high branching varieties where we had a lot of moisture season long. But this branching gets initiated much earlier than probably most ever thought about. I walk a lot of fields now, and you'll see this branching initiating at V2, V3, and starting to occur. If you're really, really dry early, you start to limit the potential for that branch yield being built right out of the gate. So dry early seasons have an impact ultimately on the ability to build that branch yield potential. And you know, in that circumstance, when you get really, really dry early season weather, it will have an impact and has some limitations on those products that fall in the left-hand bucket. Okay, so over on the right-hand side now, our low VPIs. Way more yield consistently coming from the main stem on these products. They'll handle transition and risk of dry weather. We see this over and over and over. As soil, water, and organic matter will decrease, they get more stability. Again, doesn't mean you can't have high-yielding, low VPI products. You absolutely can. They will handle stressful conditions better, whether that be from Mother Nature or within a field. There is, in the perfect environment, where these things do have a risk, is they might lose out on the very top end yield potential. And you know, Chris referenced this morning, the desire and appetite to get all the branches and build all that branch yield on his plants. And I would agree. If I've got a variety with a propensity to build a lot of yield on branches, and I give it an environment like he's able to drive incredibly high yields, there's going to be more opportunity over here. It's an opportunistic thing. Where you've got that opportunity to build more branch yield. So we do a fair amount of testing. We've got some partners, BASF is one of them that we've worked really closely with in looking at their variety portfolio. I've hidden names of varieties to protect the innocent here, but what I want to lay out is that there's a wide representation of varieties in the industry. Within portfolios, if you look within an individual portfolio, you'll see a nice spread typically of lower and higher VPI products. And then if you look just industry-wide, you can see everything from, and The numbers don't mean a lot. What I'm just telling you is that if it's a lower number, it branches less. It's a lower VPI product. If it's a higher number, it branches more. It's a high VPI product. So you can see that there's a pretty broad range in all these varieties that we're laying out here. And with this knowledge, you know, there's a few things. I think with this knowledge, you can get better at how you think about what varieties make sense for your farm, how you think about managing the varieties, but also as we turn over varieties really quickly, part of the advantage is how do I take advantage of genetic improvements while also not being scared of the risk of trying something brand new broadly. And this knowledge helps us make sure that we avoid train wrecks with brand new products. When we understand how they're building their yield, it gives us an advantage in how we place them for success right out of the gate before they've had a lot of commercial exposure. So the next step in our journey, so we've just talked about mapping the variety mechanism and understanding the branch potential. I've already talked about, you know, and that was our mechanism, that's our plant mechanism. I've talked about the importance of the environment, the subfield environment, and our fields, and the OM, the CEC, the slopes, all of those things that are either topographic or soil layers that we think about in our operations. How can we now take what we know about the varieties and then map it to our fields? That was our next challenge, to try to simplify, because you may be looking at me saying, man, this is all great, but I've got what I think is all flat fields, or I've got elevation changes. How do I know where I'd put a high or low VPI product? And you know, one thing I've learned in this business is it doesn't matter if you've got 1 foot of elevation change in your fields or 12 feet. We all have these variable environments that require a different recipe for success. We've seen that over and over again in our work in both corn and soy. So what we wanted to do next was take the plant mechanism and now fix it to the field environments. So here's a satellite image of a field. Doesn't really tell me a whole lot other than it's a picture of a field. What we did was we looked at all of the factors that are influencing soybean yield, and we weighted those factors differently to create a proprietary layer within our business that we call our, fittingly, we're very creative, our Variety Profile Index, or VPI layer. So we're pretty creative here. So here's the field looking at it in a little different manner. This is laying a VPI layer over the top of that satellite image. And again, these are just indices on the side. They don't pay attention to the numbers. What it's telling you is that as we go from this north end of this field, where you've got more of these oranges and maybe light greens, these are transitional acres. These are low VPI acres. These are acres that we know have factors in them that have a lot of risk against yield. They probably have more slope, they've got lower organic matter, those type of factors. And when we get down into these purples and blues, like you see down in the south end of this field, those are the high VPI acres. Again, acres that are more likely to have the propensity to support a variety that's building yield on branches. So this is a kind of a complex background layer that we simplify to look this way, to just help us guide, engage, and characterize the fields to understand how much exposure we've got to areas in that field that will be classified as high VPI versus low VPI. Now I can essentially have the mechanism of the plant or the variety, if I have that known mechanism, and I can pair it to the environment using the same methodology. This is essentially a tactic to try to ensure that we increase our probability of having success with the varieties we're using. Now, you probably look at this and maybe think like I do and say, boy, does this provide the opportunity down the road? Is multi-variety going to be something that we should be thinking about? And the technology, planter-wise, is there. And I think as I look at the yield potential opportunity to be gained by getting the right variety in the right place, the answer is going to be yes. I think there's going to be an opportunity to use a methodology like this to get to multi-variety in the near future. So just so you don't think I'm completely blowing smoke here, I'm going to show a little bit of yield data to support the concept. So for this to all work, there was one really, really important thing that we had to prove, and that was if you got VPI off of a product, if you classified it as high or low VPI in a, let's say, 2021, for example here, that had to actually carry over into a completely different year with different weather and still show that it increased your probability of success, right? Because if we scored these two products and then they flip-flopped on yield the next year, this was a waste of time. We really didn't achieve anything. And so we've got product A and product B here. Product A in green is a low, what we classify as a low VPI product. Product B would be a high. And so that was a score taken in 2021. Within our data analysis, when we look at variety performance year over year, what we're able to do is take our strip trials and lay them across these different environments in the field, and then we're able to parse out the product performance in high and low VPI areas of the field and look at, did one variety perform better than another in each of those environments. So we've classified the products. Again, we've classified the environments. We lay our trial work over the top of this layer, and then we come back and we look at the probability in 2022, completely different weather year, that this accurately predicted performance, or at least increased our confidence from a 50-50 chance of winning. So this is the 2022 field win rate by our VPI bins. So start on the left. We got our high VPI bins here. So these are our good areas of the field, our good acres in the field, and we're looking at the probability of product A or product B winning in those good areas of the field. And what you see, high VPI bins, good areas, we have a 60% win rate with our high VPI product and a 40% win rate with our low. If we flip-flop that and now go to these orange areas across our, and these trials will be taking place from Iowa to Ohio, so really broad scale testing here. If we go to all these low VPI areas and fields that we tested in, and we aggregate those bins, guess what happens with our performance, those products? Flip-flops. And all of a sudden now, product A has a over 60% win rate. The low VPI product wins in that environment. So a classification in 2022, or 2021, I'm sorry, predicted or increased our probability of success in 2022. And that's, after doing this now for multiple years, the really cool part is this is incredibly, incredibly repeatable. Like I can go walk brand new varieties that are not even commercially launched yet. I can look at about 2 or 3 locations, and I've probably got a reasonably decent idea of how that's going to shake out. And we see the same repeatable mechanism from Iowa all the way to Ohio with these varieties. We finally found something that you could repeat over and over and over with soybeans. How much were they willing to compensate? How much yield were they building on their branches? Now, the one watch out, and the reason that we actually still go through a process of physically sampling and physically scoring these varieties, sometimes you can get products that look like they're going to be high branchers. They'll put branches on, but they don't actually put any yield there. And my experience has been, those are the ones you want to, if you're in an advancement team at a seed company, you want to find the door pretty quickly, because if I'm wasting energy on trying to put on branches and then I don't put any yield on them, that's not a good combination. And we tend to find those are not top performers, the ones that act that way. So you do have to be a little bit careful to just think you can walk out and say, oh, because it's got branches, that means it's high VPI. Not always the case. We do find varieties that buck that trend. Okay, so what's the risk of being wrong? And just, again, aggregated data over multiple years, what we tend to see is if we get the wrong the wrong mechanism and the wrong environment, it's typically a 3 to 6 bushel disadvantage. So there's, what I'm telling you is, and again, this is across all products we test, but what I'm telling you is there's an opportunity. And while this isn't a low-hanging fruit, it's maybe closer to the middle of the tree, it still brings some real yield opportunity to our operations by getting placement right. I've just got a few more things, and then I'm going to open it up to questions. So if we understand soybean mechanism now, and we understand that we have products that tend to want to build yield on branches and those that tend not to, that's pretty powerful information because it can allow us to do more than just place varieties. And that's been the next evolution as we've continued in our research internally to now understand, and I already referenced kind of the multi-variety concept. That's certainly an area and an opportunity that this opens up. But anybody want to guess what other opportunity this really quickly opens up if you understand how a variety builds yield? Population. So, you know, what we've embarked on the last couple of years is field scale trials with products that we had known classifications of low or high VPI on, and looking at population responses once we understand that mechanism. So we know there's value to soybean product placement by mechanism, but the question was, is there value to management? Intuitively, I think we'd all say there probably would be if we knew this information. And the question then was, does this mechanism influence the optimal seeding rate for a given variety? Should our population curve change based on the type of variety or the mechanism in which it builds yield? and then really ultimately the impact to us as growers, does this variety mechanism then give us the opportunity or the insight to either make adjustments to a flat seeding rate that we might put out in the field, or, you know, if we are running some sort of a variable rate script, does it give us the opportunity to make adjustments to a variable rate script if we know this about the variety? Those were the outlying questions as we entered into this work. I'm going to highlight some of our work here from 23. And so we had 19 locations where we looked at 5 seeding rates, and this is all field scale work. So field scale typically replicated twice of 80, 110, 140, 170, and 200,000. So we looked at a wide range where we tried to catch hopefully the lower end of that bell curve at 80 that might be feasibly being planted commercially, and then the upper end, you know, not too many probably planting at 200,000 these days, but tried to catch the upper end of that tail too. And again, we were looking at both low and high VPI products within this. And so, you know, just trial setup. We would lay this out across some of our proprietary layers in the background, and essentially once we get back the yield data from our growers, we can then parse out, again, the response to population across different environments, which is what makes this really cool. You know, understand the performance in environments within each of those strips. There was a lot of talk this morning around trial setup and how do you get to the right answers and how do you account for variability. In our business, we try to drive to variability when we look at testing, because we know we can go in and isolate those environments and compare like environments and get to answers at a subfield level within these strips. So here's just some pictures, and guess what? If you think that varieties compensate more when they get space, I can validate that. So key takeaways here. If you plant 200,000, you drive a product more main stem. If you plant at 80,000, you can get a candelabra. So this is a high VPI product, and what you notice at 80,000 is we're looking at six branches coming off of that main stem with this high VPI product. And even when we bump it clear up to 200,000, these high VPIs will tend to still try to branch. They actually are resilient in their desire and appetite to want to try to branch, but we clearly drove more of that yield to the main stem by pushing it to 200. The low VPI products, again, this is out of central Illinois as well. I failed to mention, if you looked at the Illinois data, there was a lot of it that was clustered from I-70 to maybe a little bit north of I-74. So a lot of our work this year was in central Illinois, probably relevant to a lot that are in this room. So we still get branches with a low VPI product at 80,000. All varieties do compensate. That is still a fact. We don't maybe get quite as much branching as what we saw in the previous picture. When we get this one out to 200,000, we've created a stick. That's what this variety wants to do. It wants to go more main stem. So before I unveil some of the population responses, now with all this that I've shown, I tell you, we have products that want to branch, high VPI. We have products that don't want to branch, that tend to be more main stem or branch less, low VPI. Which do you think would benefit from a lower population in general? Branching. Yeah, so I think we could generalize our thought process now to, when we understand this mechanism, we would probably predict that a product that wants to branch more is going to do better at low populations. The way I've got these charts set up, essentially I've tried to make it simple to look at the deviation from trial average. So if it's red, it means it was negative against the trial average. If it's to the blue, it was positive. And this is just the high VPI products right now, okay? So this is a conglomeration of just the highs, and we'll show the lows here in a minute. What you notice is a bit of a bell curve here. And we have to understand economics within this too, right? So every 30,000 increase in seeding rate, we need to get at least a bushel gain for that to be an economically good decision. So if we don't get plus a bushel, then it didn't really gain us much. So we see there's two populations that are blue, 110 and 140. I don't think this is a massive surprise, and I'll let you in on a little insight. You know, you look at 80,000, it didn't have the best year in this trial set. It's 1.55 below trial average. Anybody want to guess why maybe the magnitude or why it wasn't as good in 2023, or why maybe you were surprised that 80,000 was that much off? But any thoughts on why it might have been the lowest yielding in this trial work? Boom. Dry early season. So 80,000 on a variety that wants to branch, and a really dry early season where we restrict some branching, and guess what? 80,000 fell. That was too low. In a different year, it may not have shaken out quite that way, but Mother Nature still has an impact on what the optimal seeding rate is. If we look at the economic best population, 110,000. I mean, we get a little bit of a yield bump going to 140, but that's not an economical improvement. So if I was just averaging, giving you an average, you know, on these high VPIs, 110 looks like a pretty sweet spot in 2023. Okay, what do you suspect I said it's a bell curve with high VPIs. What do you think you see with lows in 2023? Knowing the way the year went. Linear response. So we still have 80,000 not being good. Makes a lot of sense. We have totally main stem varieties at 80,000 in a dry year. We didn't have enough plants. And you just see it stair step. And this may surprise people, but in 2023, and a bunch of these trials were in good black ground in central Illinois. I can tell you that. We stair-stepped all the way to 200,000 with these low VPIs. Now, again, let's take it back to economics. You know, economically, we're probably somewhere in that 140 to 170 range that would have been the most economically viable number. But there's a linear trend. And quite frankly, I think we'd all agree, a very different trend based on how the variety is building yield. Fair to say? Now, the magnitude of this response, remember 2023's weather, okay? That's the one thing. I don't want anybody walking out of here saying, oh my gosh, AJ said we got to plant 200,000 again across the board, because there's going to be a lot of people who look at me pretty crazy if you walk out of here and say that. Not what I'm saying. Magnitude of this response certainly impacted by the weather, but what it does tell us is that if we know we've got a really main stem variety, we want to be careful getting it too far down there, especially if we have any risk of stand attrition or stand loss. Okay, and then just let me walk through this. So what I've done now is take the high branching varieties, and I've broken this out within each of the populations by different slope groupings. So I'm looking at less than 1% slope, really flat, 1 to 3% slope, and then greater than 3% slope. And you can probably expect that in a really dry year, we were stair-stepping the stress, and greater than 3% had the most stress. So here's the other nuance, and you know, how many variable rate soybeans in the room today? Very few. Okay, so if you were hypothesizing about a variety that you know wants to branch, okay, it has a tendency to really want to branch, but you're taking it into a stress environment. You're taking it into a greater than 3% slope where you've got risk of losing that branch yield. How might you manipulate that variety with population in that environment? Jack it up. And that trend is fairly evident when you get to the greater than 3% slopes. You have an opportunity by increasing population in that environment. Now, this product, and this is for those that have maybe a little bit more variable fields. If you've got that same variety, let's say you've got a field that's 90% relatively flat, and you've got a little bit of slope in the field, you're still going to want less plants on those low slope areas. So the way I tend to think about these high VPI products now in a variable rate program is your range of populations is going to be much wider. You're going to be low in your best acres, and you may actually be looking at driving your population higher on your toughest or more transitional acres with that type of mechanism of yield. So it's a wider range of population deviation. The low VPIs, and we didn't have a ton of, so I've just got this broken out by less than 1 and 1 to 3%, but think of it in the same manner of 1 to 3 getting to a little bit more stress, less than 1 being less. It's pretty clear. Like if we were at 80 or 110, we lost. And as we stair-stepped up in population, we started to win more and more. And so for me, when I think about these main stem products, and I've had a number of conversations this winter with growers who say, well, AJ, I didn't like a variable rate population script that took me down to 100,000 or 110 on the low end on my really good acres, because I lost stand. I had some saturation, had stand attrition, and all of a sudden I had 60,000 or 70,000 final, and my yield was not very good. I lost yield, variable rate didn't work for me. And I asked the question, what variety was in those scenarios? And pretty much 100% of the time, it was a variety that built all of its yield on the main stem. So yeah, not surprised at all that on the low end of a population script or a variable rate script, where we then lost some stand, that we lost yield at really low populations with a main stem variety. No surprise at all to me there. So, outside of just adjusting seeding scripts or thinking about population management, we're also using this knowledge in replant decisions. If I have a known stand loss or stand attrition, and it's occurred on a variety that is going to build all its yield on main stem, and I'm down to 30, 40, 50,000, and I'm trying to decide, what should I do? That knowledge helps give us a little bit more confidence in making the replant decision as well. So just think about the different ways that understanding this mechanism can help you make more informed and educated decisions. Okay, so I actually lied. I'm going to be on time, which is great. If I just conclude the story, and then let me answer questions, because I'm going to be surprised if we don't have some questions here. So if I just conclude this story up, there's three things I'd say take away here. VPI, novel approach, it's characterizing soybeans. It's given us insight into the mechanism, which then allows us to pair it to an environment and more confidently predict placement. Understanding VPI mechanism also influences our soybean population responses. I think that has been clear for 2 years in a row in our testing, that there's a different population curve based on this known mechanism. And lastly, what I'll leave you with that is absolutely true is what we started with, that we can't predict Mother Nature. Yield is just an outcome. Yield's an outcome of what management decisions we make and what Mother Nature throws at us. So Mother Nature will still have influence over what the optimal seeding rate is. 2023 was a year where optimally we probably would have been a little bit higher than what we maybe would have been accustomed to. There's trends that clearly exist, and I hope what you're seeing from me is that by pulling these different levers, you can try to put yourself as a grower in a position to more consistently win and to try to mitigate some of the influence that Mother Nature may have over us. Can't influence it all. We try to mitigate it as best we can. Okay. I'm going to stop, open it up to questions here, or anything else soybean related that may be of interest in the room. Yes, sir.
You have the VPI calculations. How do we know when we go to a certain seed breeder, a certain brand, how that matches to what you've got?
You're going to have a whole lot of trouble probably matching it all up without that known information. I mean, and I've referenced, you probably caught it earlier, I referenced, one portfolio that is publicly out there with the VPI score. So BASF has that along with the placement algorithm available to their customers. And then we also internally for our customer base house some of that information as well. So today, those are the two avenues to get it. We're always approaching and looking for other ways to get this further out into the marketplace, so there will be more opportunity to see it in the future. Today, those are the two places it exists. Yes?
So kind of piggybacking off of what he said, so many of the seed companies, a lot of the varieties, they're medium bush varieties. So how do you take and translate that into variable rate? I mean, still, with just that known information, just being a medium bush, because so much of that, because I understand, or at least my rationalize is for a lot of seed companies going medium bush, it's a lot more different environment.
Yep.
A lot more broad acres.
Yep.
How do you kind of start to build variable rates into that?
It's tough, and the reason and I'm not trying to dodge your question here, but the reason why it's tough is because bushy doesn't mean branchy. And some of the bushiest varieties I've seen have been some of the most main stem. So if you purely try to get to this answer off of a seed guide saying medium bush or bushy or not, you're not getting to branchy or not, and whether or not it builds yield on branches. So I personally can't confidently get there today just based off of what's in a commercial seed guide. I know you don't like that answer, but that's...
And I did some variable rate planting on different varieties this past year, and I did see that a lot of things, it did seem like it fell in that 120 to 140, that it caught a lot of the varieties with the highest yield gain.
Yeah.
So what I see is important, and not knowing that, VPI was my product.
Right.
But as you took things higher, you did see some separation
Yeah.
of where the yield came from.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this, that's where this helps us get to the why we're seeing what we're seeing. And it's a repeatable mechanism that's actually correlating to an outcome. And I don't think it's hard for me to argue, or hard for me to get my head wrapped around how does bushy, medium bushy, does that always correlate to an outcome? I'm not sure it does. It gives you something on general plant architecture, probably doesn't correlate to an outcome.
AJ, thank you.
And I've not been repeating the questions. I will start doing that.
Thank you for your work with this, AJ. I wanted to ask, do you see other applications for this in terms of other inputs? I'm thinking specifically about pre-emergence PPOs or biologicals that specifically influence the branching to behave more like stems. Do you see this being an application that we could use as a decision matrix for those kind of products?
Would everybody have been able to hear that, or should I repeat? Oh, you want me to repeat? The question was, is there other management practices that we could correlate and use this information towards? So, biologicals, there could be any number of other management factors that potentially could be at play. I don't think there's any question. Do I have all the answers? We're trying to work our way through. I'll say I'm back to the low-hanging fruit, right? Population was the easy one to get to, but I think once we understand this mechanism, you brought up PPO herbicides and potential risks there. I mean, there's the variety tolerance aspect of it, but there is also this, hey, if I have reduced stand by some chance, and I have this information, it probably helps me in making a decision about the next step forward. So I would say there's probably a lot of ways in which we can think about utility for this, and from a management perspective, we're just on the tip of the iceberg of, what fertility influence is there on these two different mechanisms? What might be a biological influence? I mean, I don't know all the answers, but I'm going to guess there is an impact.
What's your row spacing on these studies and the influence it has?
Yep. What's the row spacing and influence that it has? So I referenced this as pretty broad. It's pretty broad testing, so it's across broad geographies, and we get into everything from, it's almost, I get 15, 20s, and 30s, so we'll get all three of those. And, I would say, generally speaking, that the narrower rows that give you more inter-row space do promote additional branching. So that inter-row space is probably as or more important than the between row space. So what I would say, though, is that the trends are exactly the same, whether you're in 15s, 20s, or 30s. Like, we can look at these varieties, and a high branching variety is always going to be higher branching regardless of row spacing. The magnitude might be just a little bit different, whereas you may branch the most in a narrow row. That makes sense? But your magnitude, it's not going to change what's a high VPI product, what's a low VPI product. You're still going to see that same trend exist. You don't like my answer, so what?
No, that's fine. I guess what I was debating on if I wanted to even say or not, but it would seem to me like, so we're 30-inch rows on strips. I would always rather have a heavy branching variety, and then I will control how much it branches by my population I plant.
Yep. Yep.
And so I guess that's where I don't see the index having.
You can, and I would agree to a certain extent. So you can manipulate the amount of branching with population, and to me that becomes really important to drive more population when you want to take a branching variety and really drive it to main stem. But what it takes away from is that opportunity we see by building a lot of yield on branches in the good environments, because that opportunistically, from an economic benefit standpoint, I can maximize yield, maximize profitability at lower populations with high VPI products on the really good acres.
Yeah, but that's all I want to plant is your high VPI.
Yeah, and that's fine. Yep. And you absolutely can think about how you can pull levers to manipulate it once you understand that mechanism too. The watch out, I think, in my brain, after looking at, or at least to that point, after looking at enough data, if you do have a really dry year and you do have transitional acres, your higher VPI products, even when you try to manipulate it with population, will lose to your more main stem varieties. That's the watch out. That's tough to answer. I mean, that depends on, the question was how much. By how much do they lose? I mean, that's variety to variety. I mean, in general, I think this past year, our data showed about a 4 bushel difference between true lows, and they were lows were 4 bushel better than highs on average, aggregated.
And how much difference in change do you have to have, like say, slope? How much of a percentage before you see that?
That was regardless, so that's aggregated broadly. It was 2023 was a phenomenal year for main stem varieties. It was the opposite. High branch varieties were better, about same magnitude. High branch varieties were better than 2021. And we had same population. And what you see, if you look at, so those scores I was showing, so if you look at how much yield's being built on branches, in 2021, we had substantially more yield. You could measure it on the same varieties tested year after year, substantially more yield built in 2021. So in a year where we did have really good rainfall early and we were able to build branch yield, it correlated all the way out to the end of the year. The last 2 years, those same varieties, if we look at amount of yield built on branches, it was lower.
Okay. The question I have is, there's been talk, I've heard of people doing some blending, varieties of the same maturity, relatively the same maturity, and for different protection reasons. It seems to me this may be an opportunity to blend these two, and kind of based on your soil types, you can kind of pick maybe a percentage blend to kind of protect you from one year, one may do better than the other. Have you guys done any experiment, any studies with that, blending?
Yep. I think everybody probably heard that question. We haven't specifically yet done any experimentation with it, but I can tell you it's come up in more than one conversation with groups that are thinking about blending varieties. So it does. I mean, if I look at, for me, it's what we've been trying to harp on is it's an opportunity to make sure that you have representation in your portfolio of both of those options, so that if you are looking at something like a blend, you want to identify good varieties that are both low in VPI and the same maturity range, so you have that opportunity, right? I mean, because today, most companies don't actually know what their portfolio looks like in this regard. They may have a whole portfolio of low VPI products in an early maturity range, and then more of a blend in later. A lot of them don't know today what that blend is. But I think conceptually, in the absence of truly like targeting a specific variety to a specific environment with multi-variety, a blend option makes a lot of sense. I'm going to get kicked off, I bet, soon, but let me, okay, yep.
As you guys were identifying different yield characteristics and plant characteristics to come up with your DPI, did you look at leaf shape and size? Was there any correlation there?
Okay, so the question was around leaf shape and size, and was there any correlation to that in yield? I can speak anecdotally. I don't know that I can speak with data to that question. I can speak anecdotally and say that there were high VPI varieties that had different leaf architectures. There were lows that did. And so it's about like the bushy question. It didn't necessarily, I would say, I would have a hard time believing there'd be a high correlation to yield, and I don't think there was a high correlation to the mechanism either, based on leaf structure.
The stem variety versus the branch variety, are the roots underground? Do they branch then and stem?
Oh man, this is, so the question was, is there root structure differences? And there is.
The same?
Now you're asking too many questions. I'll just say there is. There is.
That might be the
Okay, I think we're
Thank
at
you.
time.
Yep.
Thank you, AJ.